Welcome to Study for Success in SMF 204. In this workshop, you will learn how and why it is important to study for your midterms, as well as reviewing some tips for studying and taking multiple choice tests. At the end of this workshop, we will review a few tips of what to do when things don't go as planned, and where you can get help. Let's get started. Why study for your midterms? In SMF 204, the reality is there is a large amount of course content in a very short amount of time. The midterm questions from the course content will not always look exactly the way the content was originally presented. Memorization of your course material in such a short period of time cannot be your only approach to studying. There is simply too much course content for your memory capacity. Want to study for success? Find ways to relate details back to larger concepts or examples. Identify relationships between ideas and be able to explain concepts in your own words. How can you do this, you ask? Great question! Let's take a look at Bloom's taxonomy of learning for help. Many professors use Bloom's taxonomy of learning to create midterm and exam questions to make sure that you're not just memorizing the material, but you're actually critically thinking about it. The bottom and most basic level of Bloom's taxonomy of learning is being able to remember facts. The next level up is understanding those facts. What do they mean? What do they tell you? The next level up is being able to apply the information. Can you apply the fact, the rule, the concept, or the idea? The next level up is being able to analyze information. Can you break down the information into its component parts? Can you teach it to someone else? The next level up is being able to evaluate the material. Can you judge the value of the information or the ideas? The top level of Bloom's taxonomy of learning is being able to combine parts of what you know to make something new. Let's look at some examples. The bottom and most basic level of learning is being able to remember. The ability to recognize and recall facts. For example, on a test, you might be asked, what are the 4 muscles that make up the quadriceps group? Or, like the example question shown here, the condition in which the foreskin does not retract from the glands is known as blank. In this remember level question, you've been asked to recall a definition. Let's look at another example, but this time looking at the next level of Bloom's taxonomy, understanding. Understanding is the ability to interpret information and understand the message being conveyed. An example of an understanding level question might ask you to describe or explain something, like describe the process of mitosis. Or you might get asked a question like the one shown here. A transsexual is a person who failed to acquire the concepts of gender stability and gender constancy as a child. The psychologist who made this statement subscribes to the blank perspective of gender identity and role development. In this understanding level question, you've been given an example of a concept to test your understanding. Next, let's look at an example from the next level of Bloom's taxonomy, the application. Being asked to apply what you know to a new situation. An example of an application question might give you a situation or scenario like shown in this example. If a fetus with an XY chromosomal structure did not produce testosterone, which of the following would happen? In this type of question, you are being asked to use what you have learned. Next, let's look at an example that is testing the next level of Bloom's taxonomy. Analysis. Being able to analyze is the ability to break down information into smaller parts, or breaking information up into its components. It is being able to recognize patterns and identifying how they are related to each other. Let's look at an example multiple choice question that you might see on your SMF midterm. Sexual Sesame Street. One of these things doesn't belong. Which one of the following methods works differently than the others? In this question, you're being asked to compare the characteristics of different concepts. Let's look at one last example at the analysis level of Bloom's taxonomy. Imagine that I give students one description of BDSM that is either framed positively or negatively. After reading the description, I asked participants to answer questions such as, I think people who practice BDSM are perverted, and I would enjoy seeing a film depicting BDSM. Participants also completed a measure of erectophilia to ensure that this did not have an impact on their ratings of BDSM. 4 possible midterm questions that could come from this description. 1. This research is best described as blank. 2. The dependent measure in the study described above was blank. 3. The independent measure in the study described above was blank. And 4. The control variable in the study described above was blank. In this type of analyze question, you are being tested on how well you understand the relationship between concepts. Now that we've reviewed some example questions from Bloom's taxonomy, take a minute to think about how you study and how you prepare for tests. Do you study term and definition? Do you actually try to understand the concept or be able to apply it? Can you analyze the material, evaluate, or actually use what you know to create something new? Now, let's take a look at how we put information from our studying into our long-term memory. Putting information into our long-term memory is a process. We can see or hear something that we can remember for a short period of time. But when studying for a midterm, we need to remember a lot of details, and we need to study at different levels of learning, as we just reviewed with Bloom's taxonomy. Timing is everything. The amount of content you are responsible for learning is high. It is important to consistently review course content so your brain has more opportunities to move information from your working memory to your long-term memory. Teach your brain what's important to remember by establishing a routine to review your course content throughout the term, after class, each week, or even bi-weekly. Think about learning a new language. Just learning the new words once or twice is not enough. You need to use the words consistently to not only remember them, but how to use them when you need them. It is also important to stay on top of your learning because trying to catch up in a hurry before each midterm is nearly impossible. Not to mention stressful. How fast can you read 30 pages? Each chapter in your SMF textbook is about 30 pages. Meet Joe. It takes Joe roughly 3 hours to read one chapter. That's not including the time he spends to quiz himself on the content or make notes. Just reading. Joe is responsible for understanding and remembering the content of 6 chapters for the upcoming midterm, but he hasn't kept up with his readings. Will Joe be able to find 18 hours in his schedule the week before the midterm to read his textbook, in addition to reviewing and quizzing himself on lecture or textbook content and staying on top of his other courses? Let's take a look at something that might help. This is the curve of forgetting. There has been a lot of research on why we forget and how to remember things more efficiently. The research on the curve of forgetting shows us that when we learn something today, what we remember from today in 24 hours will be almost 100%. But by day 2, what we remember from that information, if we don't look at it again, will be almost 50%. And over time, or the course of that week, by day 7, what we remember from day 1 will actually be 20%. By reviewing for 5 to 10 minutes a night within 24 hours, the retention stays higher. The retention is almost 80 to 90% of that material. But what's awesome is that by day 7, it only takes you 5 to 10 minutes to review that material again to bring your retention of that material back up to that 80% mark. What's even better is by the time the midterm comes, after 30 days, the research shows us that it should only take 2 to 4 minutes to bring the material back to memory, and your retention of that should be quite high, up to 80%. A small commitment to reviewing your course content can make a big difference. Without consistent review, by the time the next SMF midterm rolls around, you will have to relearn a lot of course content. Next, let's think about where to study for our midterms. Take a second. Where do you do most of your studying? Where you do your studying can have a really big impact on your learning. It is always recommended to have at least 2 favorite study locations, on campus and/or off campus, and to use these study spots for only studying. You want to associate being focused getting work done, and learning in your study location. When studying, consider what conditions create an ideal study environment for you. What's the lighting like? The desk space? Temperature of the room? Seating arrangement? Noise level? These things all can impact how much you can focus and how much you can get done. It's always not recommended that you use your bed for studying, as you want to associate it with sleeping, not school stress. It is really important to also remove your biggest distractions from your study spot. Changing your focus constantly from one task to another is disruptive to the cognitive process. Removing distractions like cell phones, notifications, or even certain websites can help you stay on task during your study time. When planning a study time, make sure you plan ahead and have all the supplies, resources, refreshments that you need to get in the zone before you start studying. Consider doing some practice questions in a location that mimics the test environment. This may help you feel more prepared and lower your anxiety. Now, let's take a look at what to do when you're studying. Take a second to think about what studying means to you. How do you study? Most students say they read over their notes from class or from the textbook. But when preparing for a test, it's important to not only read the information, but to also practice answering questions and writing the information down. An example would be summarizing or writing your notes out in your own words. When reading and listening to your lectures, you're taking in information. This is really important, but when many students go to study, they continue to only take in information by rereading their notes, reviewing their slides, and they don't take time to actually practice outputting the information. Outputting the information, or active studying, is important because it lets you practice retrieving the information from your memory. This helps you learn because retrieving the information enhances your long-term memory of the information. Also, retrieving the information is what you have to do in a testing situation, so doing practice questions are always a great idea. Here are 7 strategies to consider trying when looking and thinking about active studying. First, let's look at cue cards. Cue cards can be an effective way to learn definitions or lists of information. The great thing about cue cards is you can take them with you so you can quiz yourself during small pockets of time during the day, like when you're waiting for the bus. Flashcards can be great because you need to read or input the information, write the flashcards out, but then test yourself. Next, looking at pictures and diagrams. Pictures and diagrams can be really effective for remembering locations, like parts of the body, order of processes, next steps. Using pictures, charts, graphs, and diagrams is a really great way to review your material. You can make it active by trying to recreate these diagrams or visuals. You could even photocopy or trace the diagram, but not include the labels, and then test yourself to see if you can label the different parts. Let's take a closer look at charts. Charts can be effective for sorting and comparing information. Thinking back to Bloom's taxonomy, sorting and comparing information is probably a good thing to know before your midterm. Charts are really great for sorting a lot of information or comparing details. It makes you take the time to ensure that you are putting down the key information, headings, lists, bolded words. You can also use a chart to test yourself. You can cover up different parts of the chart and try to fill in the blanks. Next, let's look at how lecture review notes can help us actively study. What was today's lecture about? What was the main topic? The next thing in your lecture review note should actually outline what those main ideas of the topic were. Then, looking at more of the details, what were the supporting details associated with the topic? What were some of the key terms? Were there any examples that will help you understand the main ideas? Looking for the relationships within this topic or between this topic and another one in the course will also help you get ahead when studying for your midterms. Lecture review notes can be handwritten, typed, linear, or even a visual concept map. They should be a summary of your lecture content. They should not be you rewriting your notes over and over again. They should contain the important concepts, problem areas, key examples, and explanations in your own words. Here is a really great example of a lecture review note from the Male Reproductive Anatomy lecture. This example has the lecture broken up into major categories with supporting details on the left-hand side of the page. It also has example test questions that might be asked listed on the right-hand side of the page. In the bottom right-hand side of the page, it includes a label diagram to make easy, quick references to where things are physically located. Most of the strategies discussed so far have been independent ways of actively studying. But what if you like studying with other people? Studying with other people can be a great way to discuss concepts, to gain additional insight, or learn a new way to understand or remember your course content. Studying with other people can give you the opportunity to teach each other, to engage multiple areas of your brain, and to solidify your understanding by being able to explain it to someone else. Studying with other people also gives you the opportunity to quiz each other on the course content. This will help you give a clear picture of what you know and what you don't know. This can also increase your confidence going into the midterm, but doing it the night before may also cause you some stress. Studying with other people may not be for everyone, as sometimes studying with classmates can lead to more socializing than studying. If you like studying with other people, make sure you choose your study partner wisely. Another way to actively study is to personalize your learning. What if you created a story to remember a concept or definition? The more unique and off the wall your story is, the more likely you'll be able to remember it later. Do you like music? Put a concept or definition to the tune of a catchy song. Is there a real-life example that you might remember that connects to the material? An example of a conditioned stimulus and conditioned response could be the one shown here. When I was younger, I had to take really awful tasting banana medicine, and it made me feel really sick. Now, when I smell anything banana, I feel nauseous. The conditioned stimulus is the banana smell and flavor, and the conditioned response is feeling sick. You could also create a mnemonic, a catchy acronym, or a saying to help remember a list of items. The example shown here replaces the letters for the sexual response cycle. Our final tip for active studying is to complete practice questions. Doing practice questions is one of the best active studying methods to ensure that you know the material as well as you need to for your test. Completing any practice questions from your textbook or provided online through the textbook is a great start. You could also create your own practice questions based on the readings or notes. Think back to Bloom's taxonomy to make sure that you are using questions at different levels. You should always complete the sample questions Professor Rye provides for you. Ensure that you are actually answering the questions and not just looking at the answers. Ask yourself why. Why is this the right answer? Especially if you get an answer wrong. Ask yourself why you got it wrong and try it again later. Doing practice questions practices the recall of information. It ensures that you know it and you're not going to rely just on your recognition memory, the I know it when I'll see it. Now, let's take a quick look at what to do in multiple choice tests. We know multiple choice tests can be challenging. So let's review some strategies to try and help overcome some of the common challenges students face when answering multiple choice questions. A common challenge is relying on recognition memory, thinking you're going to recognize the answer when you see it. The most common mistake will also be an option. Covering the answers with your hand and coming up with the answer on your own without reading the available options is the first strategy. There is always the possibility and challenge of having more than one right answer. The example of A and B, or all of the above, the question is asking you to follow which answers are true and false. Going through each possible answer and writing down true or false beside each option will help you determine what is the correct answer to that question. Another common challenge is tricky wording or misreading what's being asked. As you're reading through each question, underline keywords. Look for negatives and qualifiers, words like not, always, never, or sometimes. Try rephrasing the question in your own words to see if it makes sense. If it does, you're probably right. If it doesn't, you might need to look back at your options. Another common challenge is that exams are always written in a time crunch, so make sure you pace yourself. Look ahead and look through your test to see how many questions are on the test, so you know roughly how much time you have per question. When you get stuck on a question, circle it and come back to it later. You may find that something else on the test later helps you remember how to answer a missed question. Another common challenge for students writing multiple choice tests is your mind going blank when you stare at the midterm or a particular question. If this happens to you, try using a memory dump. A memory dump is where you spend the first few minutes of a test writing out everything you can remember studying, or the top 10 things that you had trouble with. Essentially, you need to create your own cheat sheet before reading any questions on the test. This may come in handy when you actually write the test. If this is something you know happens to you, creating this cheat sheet with the top 10 things you know you're going to forget can be really helpful when you're preparing for a test. If you find your mind goes blank, you could be panicking, so making sure that you're focusing on your breathing for a few minutes to try and calm down. Something that also helps many students is to write out what is worrying you, so you can free up your working memory space for midterm content. Another common challenge is that you don't understand what is being asked by a question. If you're not sure what the question is asking, ask yourself where in the course the ideas or concepts in the question are coming from. Sometimes, if you can identify other content taught around the same time, you might be able to remember something that helps answer that question. If you are stuck, star it, move on, and be sure to come back to it later. Sometimes, when you come across an answer that might seem right, you might want to change your answer. Changing your answer can be okay, as long as you can justify yourself why you are changing it. And lastly, make sure to go back over your test and the answers you've answered to make sure that you have not left any of them blank. The worst case scenario is you take an educated guess for an extra mark. Here are some tips of what to do when things don't go quite as planned. After you get your midterm marks back, it is essential that you review your completed midterm. To do this, you need to attend Professor Rye's midterm review sessions. It is important to look at your midterm to see what types of mistakes you made so you can improve for the next midterm. There is a worksheet to review returned exams posted in Learn. This worksheet will help you walk through your exam to see where your mistakes were. Some of the common mistakes that students make is that they didn't learn enough of the information. Either information was missing from the study notes that you had made, or that you didn't read the textbook thoroughly enough. You may have studied the information, but then just couldn't remember it on the midterm. You might have known the main idea, but you may not have remembered the specific details. There are also personal factors that could get in the way of your success. Experiencing a mental block, being tired, hungry, or not able to concentrate. Your mind might have been somewhere else during the midterm, or you panicked while writing the midterm. Making silly mistakes is also very common. Changing a correct answer to a wrong one, or just rushing through the midterm and missing a detail, a word that makes the question wrong. Needing to work on your test-taking skills is definitely something to think about. Needing to pace yourself correctly during a test, misreading questions, you don't want those common mistakes to happen to you. Now, who can you turn to for help? Asking for help can be challenging. If you need help, talk to Professor Rye or the TA about what concepts you find difficult, but do it as soon as possible, throughout the term. Don't wait until the night before the exam. It's just too late. If you want to build some of your academic skills, you might want to check out some of the services offered by the Student Success Office. You can make a one-on-one appointment with a peer success coach. You could attend a workshop, or you could review the online tip sheets. If you need additional personal support, you can check out the services offered by Counseling Services. You can also make a one-on-one appointment or attend one of their workshops. This concludes our Study for Success in SMF 204. Hopefully you've learned some great tips and tricks to make studying easier and more efficient. Good luck on your midterms!